I always loved the idea of spending a weekend alone in a cabin. When I found one to rent deep in the woods, I jumped at the chance. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape, a break from my busy life in the city. I arrived on a Friday afternoon. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows over the gravel driveway. The cabin was small but cozy. It had a fireplace, a little kitchen, and a loft bedroom. I unpacked my things, made a quick dinner, and settled in for the night with a book. At first, the quiet was nice. I could hear the wind moving through the trees and an owl hooting in the distance. As the night went on, the quiet started to feel creepy. Every creak of the cabin sounded louder in the silence. I kept telling myself it was just the old wood settling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I went to bed early, hoping a good night's sleep would help. I woke up in the middle of the night to a noise outside. It sounded like something heavy moving through the bushes. I got out of bed and looked out the window. In the dim moonlight, I could just make out a figure near the trees. It was too dark to see clearly, but it looked like a man. I told myself it was probably just a hiker or a hunter, someone who had gotten lost. But the figure didn't move, and the longer I watched, the more scared I felt. I forced myself to go back to bed, pulling the covers over my head like a child. The next day, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I decided to go for a walk to clear my mind. The woods were beautiful in the daylight, and I started to feel a bit silly for being so scared the night before. But as I walked, I found tracks in the dirt, leading away from the cabin. They were human tracks, deep and fresh. I followed them for a while, but they veered off into a thicker part of the woods. I decided to turn back, not wanting to get lost. When I got back to the cabin, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a footprint on the porch, just outside the door. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on and a knife by my bed. Around midnight, I heard the noise again. This time, it was closer, right outside the window. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept to the window and looked out. The figure was back, standing just a few feet away. I could see him clearly now, a man with a scraggly beard and dirty clothes. He was staring right at me. I panicked, grabbing my phone to call for help. But there was no signal. I was alone. I decided to confront him, grabbing the knife and opening the door. But when I stepped outside, he was gone. I stood there, knife in hand, my breath coming in short gasps, feeling both foolish and terrified. The next morning, I packed up and left as quickly as I could. I never looked back. I reported the incident to the rental agency, but they said no one had ever had any problems there before. Maybe it was just a drifter passing through, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided something terrible. Back in the city, I tried to put the weekend behind me. But sometimes, late at night, I hear noises outside my window. When I look out, I swear I see that same figure, standing just a few feet away, staring at me. I moved to get away from him, but what if he followed me? What if he's still out there, watching and waiting? I love hiking, but this trail was different. It was supposed to be a quick day hike through a dense forest. I set off early, excited to enjoy the peace and beauty of nature. As I walked deeper, the forest got darker, the trees thicker, and the sounds of birds and animals faded away. At one point I realized I had lost the marked trail. Panic started creeping in as I tried to find my way back, but the thick bushes made it impossible. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. I stumbled upon a small clearing and decided to camp for the night, hoping rescuers would find me soon. The night was eerily quiet. No rustling leaves or distant bird calls, just the sound of my own nervous breathing. Suddenly, I heard a faint rustling nearby. My heart raced as I strained to see through the darkness. Then I saw them, a pair of eyes reflecting in the dim light of my fading flashlight. Fear gripped me as the creature emerged, a large mountain lion, its gaze locked on me. Instinctively, I grabbed a nearby stick, waving it and shouting to scare it off. The mountain lion hesitated, then vanished into the shadows. I sat there, trembling, adrenaline pumping through me. I knew I had to stay alert, wary of any more encounters. As dawn approached, I heard distant voices calling out. Help had finally come. Relief flooded over me as I stumbled towards the search team. Reflecting on that night in the wilderness, it remains the most terrifying experience of my life. It taught me to respect nature's unpredictability and to always be prepared. Now, when I hike, I carry extra supplies and stick closely to marked trails, aware of the dangers lurking just beyond. But sometimes, in the quiet of night, when the wind rustles through the trees, I still hear that faint rustling nearby. And I wonder, was it really just a mountain lion watching me that night, or something else, something that still waits out there in the darkness? I went for a hike alone, aiming for a remote trail not often used. It was a clear day, but I felt uneasy as I entered the dense forest. The path twisted unpredictably, with fallen branches and thick bushes slowing me down. Hours passed, and the sun started to set. I realized I had lost track of time and my surroundings. Panic set in as I tried to find my way back, but I ended up stuck in a thorny dead end. Darkness fell fast, and the woods became silent except for the rustling of leaves. I stumbled through the bushes, my heart racing with each step. Every snap of a twig or distant sound made my nerves jump. Suddenly, I heard a low growl nearby, sending chills down my spine. I froze, trying to see through the darkness, but the growls got closer. Adrenaline kicked in, and I ran blindly through the woods, branches scratching my skin. Fear kept me going until I couldn't run anymore. Gasping for breath, I leaned against a tree, trying to make sense of where I was. Then, through the trees, I saw faint lights in the distance. Relief washed over me as I stumbled towards them. I reached a gravel road and a passing car screeched to a stop when they saw me, disheveled and trembling. The driver, an elderly man, kindly offered me a ride back. I gratefully accepted, feeling thankful but still uneasy. As we drove away, I glanced back at the dark forest, shivering at the thought of what might have been lurking there. But as we drove further, I noticed something odd in the rearview mirror. A shadowy figure stood at the edge of the woods, watching us leave. My heart skipped a beat, and a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it hadn't wanted me to leave. It was a cool autumn morning when I decided to go hiking alone. I'd found a hidden trail online that promised amazing views and a good challenge. The sky was a perfect blue, and the leaves were a mix of gold, red, and orange. I packed my backpack with water, some snacks, a flashlight, and my phone. I also took a printed map just in case my phone died. The first few hours were perfect. The trail was quiet except for the occasional rustling of leaves and distant bird calls. I felt really peaceful, surrounded by nature. As I climbed higher, the path became steeper and rockier. I stopped often to catch my breath and take in the views. After a while, I noticed the trail markers seemed less frequent. I checked my map and realized I'd missed a turn. I went back a bit, but I couldn't find the right path. My phone's GPS was no help. There was no signal this deep in the forest. I decided to keep moving, hoping to find another marker or at least a recognizable landmark. The sky started to get dark earlier than I expected. Thick clouds rolled in, blocking the sun and casting the forest in a strange twilight. I walked faster, but the trail seemed to disappear entirely. Panic started to set in. I was lost, and the light was fading fast. I remembered the flashlight in my pack and pulled it out, thankful I had brought it. The beam cut through the dark, but it also made the shadows deeper and scarier. Every rustle and snap made my heart race. I knew I had to find shelter soon or risk spending the night in the open. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon an old, rundown cabin. It looked abandoned, but it was a shelter, and I had no other options. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was musty, and the floor creaked under my weight. I found a corner free of debris and settled in for the night, hoping for daylight to bring a way out. Sleep was hard to come by. Every noise outside sounded like a threat, and the wind howled through the gaps in the walls. When the first light of dawn filtered through the cracks, I felt a wave of relief. I packed up my things and stepped outside, determined to find my way back. With the new light, I could see a clearer path leading away from the cabin. I followed it, and after a while, I found a trail marker. My spirits lifted as I realized I was back on the main trail. The hike back to my car was long and tiring, but each step felt like a victory. When I finally reached my car, I was exhausted but relieved. As I drove away, I thought about the experience. It had been terrifying, but it also taught me a lot about being prepared and staying calm. I knew I would hike again, but next time, I would be better prepared and more careful. Just as I was about to leave the forest behind, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. I drove faster, eager to put distance between myself and whatever might be lurking in those woods. I've always loved hiking, especially exploring new trails. One summer afternoon, I decided to try a new path up in the mountains. The sky was clear, and I was ready for a good workout. At first, the trail was easy with wide paths and clear signs. But as I climbed higher, the path became narrower and rockier. The trees grew thicker, and I noticed fewer hikers around. I thought maybe everyone else was at the popular spots. After about an hour, I came to a fork in the path. My phone map wasn't clear, but I trusted my gut and chose the left path. It was steeper than I expected, but I liked the challenge. Soon I realized it wasn't just steep, it was dangerous. Loose rocks made every step tricky, and the trail was almost hidden by thick bushes. Then I heard it, a rustling in the bushes ahead. I froze, my heart pounding. Maybe it was just a small animal, I told myself. But the rustling grew louder and closer. My breathing sped up. I grabbed a thick branch for protection, feeling a bit silly but needing the comfort. Slowly, I moved forward. The rustling stopped. I waited, looking around, but saw nothing. Feeling a bit better, I kept going, though my nerves were on edge. After a while, I realized the trail had completely disappeared, and I was lost. Panic set in. The sun was starting to set, and the shadows grew longer, making everything look eerie. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked different in the fading light. I cursed myself for not bringing a compass or paying better attention to my route. As darkness fell, I found a small clearing and decided to stay there for the night. I gathered some dry branches and managed to start a small fire. The flickering flames provided some comfort, but every crackle in the woods made me jump. I barely slept, waking at every sound. The night seemed endless, but finally dawn broke. With the first light, I felt a renewed determination to find my way back. I decided to head downhill, thinking it would eventually lead me to a main path or a stream. After what felt like hours of struggling and sliding down the rocky slope, I stumbled upon a wide, well-worn trail. Relief washed over me. Following the path, I soon saw familiar landmarks from the hike up. I quickened my pace, eager to leave the dense forest behind. As I descended, I encountered a group of hikers. They looked surprised to see me coming from the direction I did. I told them briefly about my ordeal, and they offered water and snacks, which I gratefully accepted. When I finally reached the trailhead, I sat on a bench, exhausted but safe. That day taught me a valuable lesson about preparation and respect for nature's unpredictability. I knew I'd be back on the trails soon, but next time, I'd be better equipped and more cautious. As I drove home, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The rustling sound from the bushes haunted me. Weeks later, while cleaning out my hiking gear, I found a small, muddy footprint on my backpack. It was much smaller than my own, I knew I hadn't been alone in those woods, and the thought still gives me chills. Last Saturday, I decided to go hiking alone. I've always enjoyed the quiet of the woods. There was a trail about an hour from my house that I hadn't tried yet. The weather was perfect, clear sky, a light breeze, and not too hot. The trail started out easy, a wide path through tall trees. As I went further, the trail got narrower and harder to see. I followed the markers on the trees, feeling sure of myself. The smell of pine and dirt was strong, and birds were singing. After about an hour, I reached a fork in the path. The left path looked well used, but I felt drawn to the right one, which seemed less traveled. My curiosity won, and I went right. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. The tree branches overhead thickened, making it darker. I checked my watch and saw it was getting late. I thought about turning back but wanted to see what was around the next corner. The path got even narrower, and soon I was pushing through thick bushes. Thorns scratched my legs, and I tripped over roots and fallen branches. I hadn't seen a trail marker in a while, and I started to worry. I kept going, hoping to find the path again. Instead, I ended up in a small open area. In the middle was an old, rusty car. It looked like it had been there forever, covered in vines and moss. I walked closer, my heart pounding, and saw the windows were broken. The place felt creepy and still. Suddenly, I heard a loud rustling in the bushes behind me. I turned around quickly, my heart racing, but saw nothing. It's just the wind, I told myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I decided it was time to head back. Finding my way back was harder than I thought. The thick bushes seemed to have swallowed the path I came in on. Panic started to set in as I realized I was lost. The forest, which had felt peaceful earlier, now felt threatening. Every sound made me jump, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. I kicked myself for not bringing a map or telling anyone where I was going. I tried to stay calm, remembering basic survival tips: follow the sun, find water, don't panic. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker. Just as the last light of day was fading, I stumbled onto a narrow path. Relief washed over me as I realized it was the trail I had started on. I hurried along, not caring about the scratches and bruises anymore. I just wanted to get out of the woods. Finally, I saw the parking lot through the trees. My car was a welcome sight. I practically ran the last few yards. As I collapsed into the driver's seat, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day lift off my shoulders. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I had always thought of the forest as a peaceful place, but now it seemed different. That old, rusty car and the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave my mind. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought I heard rustling outside my window. It was probably just my imagination, but the memory of that day wouldn't let me rest. I learned my lesson: nature can be beautiful but also unforgiving. Always be prepared, respect the wild, and don't let curiosity lead you somewhere you can't find your way back from. But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still out there, watching, waiting. The sun was already sinking behind the mountains when I started my hike. The path was familiar, one I had walked many times, but today it felt different. The air was cooler, and the forest seemed quieter than usual. I tightened my backpack straps and adjusted my headlamp as the shadows grew longer. The trail twisted through thick woods, the kind that made you feel like you were in a tunnel with no clear end. I kept my eyes on the ground, watching for roots and rocks that could trip me up. After about an hour, I came to a split in the path. One way led to a scenic overlook, and the other went deeper into the forest. I chose the second path, wanting to be alone and push myself. As I walked, the trees seemed to crowd closer. The light from my headlamp barely cut through the thick bushes. Suddenly, I heard a rustling behind me. I stopped, holding my breath, and listened. The sound stopped too. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal and kept walking. But then I heard it again, closer this time. My heart started to pound. I walked faster, hoping to lose whatever was behind me. The sound of footsteps followed, keeping up with my pace. Panic set in. I broke into a run, my breath coming in short gasps, the light from my headlamp bouncing wildly. The trail became steeper, and I slipped on loose rocks. I forced myself to slow down to avoid falling. The footsteps were still there, not stopping. My mind raced with thoughts of who or what could be following me. Then I saw it, a small clearing up ahead. I ran toward it, desperate for some open space. When I reached it, I turned around to face the trail. Nothing. The footsteps had stopped. I shone my headlamp around, but saw nothing unusual. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew something had been there. I decided to head back the way I came, not wanting to risk whatever was out there. As I retraced my steps, the forest felt less threatening. The cool air was a welcome relief, and the sounds of the night returned. By the time I reached the trailhead, my fear had faded, replaced by a sense of relief. I got into my car and locked the doors, sitting there for a moment to collect myself. I looked back at the trail, now covered in darkness, and knew I had made the right decision. The drive home was quiet, the events of the night replaying in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been watched, but I also felt a strange sense of accomplishment. I had faced my fear and come out the other side, stronger for it. But as I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't forget the feeling of being followed. It stuck with me, a cold reminder that the forest held secrets. I promised myself that I would be more careful in the future, but I wouldn't let this experience stop me from hiking. The forest had its mysteries, but it was also a place of beauty and peace. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought I heard footsteps outside my window. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched never left. The forest had left its mark on me, and I knew I would never forget the night I felt its presence so clearly.